Welcome to the show. Hello, Chris. How are you this morning?
Am doing well. I'm a little hungover with a lot of Thanksgiving in my belly. A lot of Thanksgiving, a lot of turkey
A
in my
lot of
belly.
Thanksgiving in my belly. Yeah,
Yeah.
dude. I feel
well,
thick.
a lot of Thanksgiving too in my belly. A lot of Thanksgiving talk, a lot of food, a lot of football, the whole shebang. Not even hungover on beer, just food.
Just food. Did you debate politics with your family, and did you win?
No, I don't even try.
Don't even try.
It's not really it's not how I want to actually spend time with my family, is debating them. It's just not like fun.
You're not that debate-brained?
Okay, let me rephrase that. It would be fun, but it's not conducive to like quality of time together / like vibe of the family unit / like health of relationships and all those things that kind of sort of probably matter a little bit. So yeah, just not worth it at this point. And I'm too far left to have anyone understand what I'm saying. So
you start critiquing the Dems, and your Republican relatives are like, hell yeah, and you're like, wrong red, brother.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any Republican relatives, so it's all just libs who don't get. Actually, that's not true. I do have some Republican relatives, but they're not they're off doing their own thing.
Because you're a cucked New Englander.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all just wealthy-ish, upper middle class libs. And
God.
It's fun.
An idyllic state, truly.
Yes, a truly ideal situation. But no, it's fine. I am feeling a little like tired and not like with it. Definitely. Yeah, it's a nice funny thing about the rare time you get like consecutive days off from work and you start to relax, and then all of a sudden you just feel like more tired. I think it's a sign of being like constantly overtired, and so when I actually relax, it's like my body's way of saying, hey bruh, you're really fucking exhausted, keep relaxing. And so it just like I get like less energized over these breaks. It makes me feel worse a lot of the time.
I kind of feel the same way, but I've decided to psyop myself into just believing that that's not true. I think if I take more than any 3 days off, I start to like lose my mind a little bit.
Yes, our brains have been corrupted by productivity.
Or not. Because maybe the solution is to just like do things that I'm actually passionate about instead of just sitting in bed and rotting all day.
Well, yes.
Which is what I did yesterday, which was awful.
That much I am in lockstep with you on that. Because I arrived to my mom's house Wednesday evening, and the first time I got in a car to like leave the house was Saturday morning. So I was in the house from Wednesday until Saturday, and even just that 2-day stretch, it was like bleh.
Not good. Very bad.
Yeah, so I don't know how you work remotely folk do it. I don't understand.
I think we all just like, we start podcasts, and this is the problem. No, I think I've just like lost my mind permanently a little bit, but it's, I think, mostly fine. But the world keeps spinning, and the brain is a muscle. You have to keep using it or you lose it.
Yeah. And that initial, once it's been slowed down, getting the snowball rolling the other way is tricky.
Yeah, it's tough. Then you have to dig yourself out of a hole. So never stop. Never, ever stop.
Yeah, I guess that's the lesson. Never quit, folks. Never stop.
Never
slow
quit.
down. Never stop the grind. Until death.
Until death. And then that's it. All right. So what is the best sales pitch for someone who is Marx curious? This is a question you put in our shared doc.
Yeah.
Do you think you have an answer?
No. This is why I put it there, because I had an experience with someone who I think was like maybe open to it, and I like went into this trying to explain like dialectics or something right off the bat, and then I was like, oh my god, Chris, I'm usually pretty good at communicating things, and I got 5 minutes in where it's like, I have so blown this. This is the biggest L of a communication.
Chris L. No.
Yeah, Chris L.
Wait, so what did they say to you? Like, in what way were they
understood
interested?
What I was saying. I was basically the opening for giving this sales pitch was, I was talking about how reading Marx, this is one of the ways that like for someone who's like maybe open to even just hear me use the word and not like immediately shut down the conversation or use the name, I talk about how it's helped me like understand my place in the world and my like relationship with other human beings better, and that it's not just some like economic theory, which I'm interested in. Like, it's actually just like, it's kind of like a therapeutic force of reading in my life. Because I think people find that, and it's not what I thought. And so I had someone ask me, like, what do you mean by that? Like, how did I help you understand your relationship to your family or to other human beings? And I tried to go on this, like, well, I was like, it's helped me understand in terms of like tensions and contradictions. And that's like an explanatory like factor for me. And then I was like trying to think like, how do I didn't actually use the word dialectic, to be clear. I didn't try and throw that at this person, but I was like, because that really is the true nature of it, is like explanation through tension is like a huge helpful. Looking at tensions and contradictions not as things which need to be solved, which causes like anxiety, and rather as just like explanatory factors, which are just sort of like part of like,
yeah.
It's not like I need to pick one or the other. Like, they're just, the tension is sort of like inherent.
They need to be sublated, solved. Yeah.
Has helped like reduce anxiety and understand my place in the world and understand why people act in ways that are really like inconsistent and frustrating, is because we're all pulled by all these different tensions and contradictions all the time. So yeah, I was trying to talk about that, and then I didn't know where to focus my energy. I was trying to talk about too many things all at once. And I think what I failed, here's where I think I failed, was that I tried to encapsulate too much of the theory into one like 5-minute sales pitch. And so then it just all turned into mumbo jumbo. Because when you tell someone, if someone asks you to explain something you're interested in, and you say, well, it's really complicated, and I think maybe the only way to really get a good grasp of it is to do a lot of reading and really to engage with it for like a long period of time. Most people are like, okay, yeah, no thank you.
You sound, incredibly pretentious.
Pretentious, but also just like, even if you don't, the only way someone will engage with something for that amount of time is if they have a reason to be interested in it. Like, I'm not just going to say to someone like, hey, there's this book series that takes like, it's like super long. It's like, 10,000 page books. And only after you've read all 10 will you be like, you'll think it's like the coolest series ever, but while you're doing it, you're going to be bored and confused until you get to the last page.
And then it will all click together.
Yeah, and you're going to be like, oh my God, that was the coolest thing ever. But that's not a perfect analogy, but still, it's just like no one's going to put in that amount of effort to something they don't have a reason to think is worth their time, particularly with all the different forms of like podcast and entertainment that are quickly and sort of fun and engaging on some level. So yeah, I was curious. Do you think that there's a universal like way to introduce this to someone who's maybe open to it?
No, I don't think there's a universal way, but I think there's ways that would be generally applicable to most people most of the time. I think I would probably, obviously, the Marxian answer here is consider the person's relationship to the means of production and come at them with it that way, right? So I ask what is this person's context of existing in the world?
They are technically in the professional managerial class.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little bit trickier, but this person's experience is not a pleasant one in that setting.
Okay. So they're in it, but they hate it.
Yes.
Okay. Based. Actually,
and amongst that class, like, does not get paid very much. And amongst that class of people, like, of course, they're paid enough to live, and they are a homeowner and all that jazz. But this person really struggles with their job and works in an academic setting. So is in the professional managerial class, but still feels like hierarchically a clear step below the professors and is treated lesser than and has to deal with all sorts of bullshit. So the person is like open to critiques of the whole thing, and it really uses lots of like Marxist frustration with their work setting and language. And I'm like, yes, like you're feeling it. But at the same time, it's not like this person is, cashier at a grocery store or something where it's a little bit more obvious to hop right into all of this, because what I'm avoiding bringing up until maybe we're a little further into the conversation is like your class and relationship to, who you're working with is kind of problematic, which is not a great lead either.
We're all labor aristocrats here. Let's be real. Our relationship to the global proletariat is kind of problematic, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Everyone's problematic except for the absolute poorest person,
right?
Whoever that is.
Yeah. Well,
He's the
but
ultimate
then you're
person.
caught in the difficult thing where it's like if you're too poor, then you can't be a communist or a socialist because then you're asking for a handout. But if you're too rich, then you're a champagne socialist and fuck you. So what is the optimal amount of money to have where you can advocate for left wing ideology in a country like the U.S.?
I think it's someone who makes like 19 an hour working at a weed shop.
No, I think it's me. I think I am in the exact position because I'm not looking for a handout. No, I'm just kidding.
Very convincing.
Very convinced. No, but I mean it is. It's always been me. I am the guy. I am actually the product of the end of history. If you think about it, if you really think about it, it is me. No, but how would I sell someone like this? I mean, like,
or just get them curious.
Well,
Not like sell them that Marx is right, but like get them curious to maybe go do a reading.
I would probably direct them. I don't know if I would have them go read like philosophic and economic manuscripts or something like right off the bat. But like, fuck, you know what? Well, this is tough because David Graeber's an anarchist, but he's a communist sympathetic anarchist. So maybe go read like Bullshit Jobs. Depending on how much they hate their job. In talking to them, I think like stressing, I guess like alienation from one's own labor is kind of like a critical thing. It would probably be the thing that I kind of like hammer home. And depending on how you want to understand Marx, I guess if you're not a structural Marxist, then you can kind of view alienation as something underpinning like all of Marx's work. So I would probably go with that.
But do we hand out readings to people? Because then we just sound like,
I don't think so.
Like,
I think you just gotta keep talking to them at first
and just kind of keep going.
Yeah. By the time someone's like actually doing a reading of a primary source text, yeah, you got them like hook, line, and sinker. Or they go off in the other direction and they're like, actually, I'm going to be a based libertarian. I don't agree with any of this. But yeah, I mean. But if you can get someone doing it,
if that has ever happened in world history, someone gets to the final word of Capital Volume 1 and they say, I am more convinced in libertarianism.
I feel like there's a lot of like kind of like reactionary like young men on Twitter who kind of like fit that to a T.
Do you think they actually do the primary text reading though?
That's kind of like I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
But I think it would be, I'm sure probably tons of people who have definitely read Capital and not become full-on revolutionary communists. I mean, it's a critique of political economy.
Yeah. So it helps to engage in it with other people. It's hard to engage with it in a group and not become kind of revolutionary, I imagine. I'm sure it exists.
It depends on the environment, probably. Like, I don't know. I feel like probably all the communists, all of the economists at the start of the 20th century probably read Capital. This is probably less true now because, like, economic history has really fallen out of favor.
Mm-hmm.
We can do more math, which is based. But there was probably a point where most economists, I imagine, were reading it and they were influenced one way or the other, even if the influence was just like, fuck this, and go run the other direction. But anywho.
Maybe I'll amend my statement to say no one who has read it alongside the David Harvey lectures has not become a revolutionary.
Yeah, it's David Harvey made David Harvey made me a Maoist. No, not really. I'm not a Maoist. But we should put that on a T-shirt.
David Harvey made me a Maoist.
It's David Harvey's portrait next to Mao. I think that would make like literally
David Harvey,
everyone angry.
David Harvey with flipping between like the fourth pair of glasses to see the Mao text in front of him. It's like, well, I can't. Which one is it?
Combat liberalism. The combat liberalism, and it's Mao punching David Harvey's 5 pairs of glasses off of his face in the style of like a Pip-Boy like Fallout cartoon. That would be based.
Merch.latestageinternet.com.
Dude, yeah, maybe.
No, I
no one would.
I will never consent to merch. You can do it on your own, but
I will never consent.
There's too much.
We're anti-consumptionist. Yeah, no, we don't need more T-shirts until we start selling T-shirts. In which case, then we do need more T-shirts, and you need to buy them. But we'll see about that.
Yeah, supply and demand is an interesting thing. You start to supply it, and you're like, I think there's a demand for
I
it.
think there's you can retroactively just make
Create
yourself
demand.
believe anything. Yeah,
But you can also kind of like retroactively make a demand where there wasn't prior.
Well, yeah, of course. That's the function of marketing.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit dismissive, but like, yeah, no, totally.
Apologies. As someone who does not work in marketing, this is just clicking now.
Yeah,
It's not actually fully just clicking, but it's like, yeah, it's kind of funny.
Well, in the words of the great George W. Bush, you've got your known knowns, you've got your unknown knowns, you've got your known unknowns, and then you've got your unknown unknowns. And the function of at least part of marketing is to help people find their unknown wants, i.e. wants that they don't even know that they didn't know that they didn't know about, you know?
Wow. What a precedent.
Big brain.
We don't make them like that anymore.
I think he said that with respect to WMDs, but or like risk assessment or something, but they really don't make them like that anymore.
No.
I love the quadrant right there, but
Yeah. Well, anyways, all right. Well, we've got our sales pitch. Just go read all 3 volumes of Capital.
Or come talk to us about alienated labor or something, and then we'll all figure it out together, because God knows I don't know either.
Yeah, come to our private, cult-like worship of unions or something. Get in circles and do like union chants that are like half Latin.
We're going to be revolutionaries that are purely of trade union consciousness. We just want the whole world to be unions. We have no vision beyond that. That's totally where it
union
stops.
states.
Everyone's going to be in a union. Yeah, union. Yeah, union states.
Yeah, that's your new country. It's just a union state.
There's no revolutionary program. It's just we're all going to be in unions and we're going to work together, and then afterward we're all going to drink together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It's going to be awesome.
That's the world I want to live in. And each union gets their own. Like if you're in like the union that is like, I don't know, people working in the, not that people do this anymore, at least in the U.S., but people working in the factories or whatever. Like you get like super strength. Like I want it to be like a fantasy world where each union has like a power that comes with it.
We're going to make a Leninist IA novel about the pitfalls of a pure trade union consciousness. Actually, it's just capitalism in different clothes. Yeah.
It always is just capitalism in different clothes, isn't it?
Yeah. But trade unionism is insufficient. That's my point. But it is good, and we do need more of it, especially in this country now when we're so cooked.
Well, everything is insufficient except for the actual thing.
The end of history, baby. Riddle of history solved. Yeah.
I was thinking about something kind of related to this. I was listening to a podcast with it was like a Haymarket podcast with what's the guy who does The Dig from Jacobin, Daniel Denver and China Miéville. You know those two people?
No, but go on.
Anyways, China wrote. Are you familiar with China at all? Like who that is? Okay, he writes mostly like fiction, but he's Marxist, and he wrote one of his more recent books was like an analysis of the Communist Manifesto. So he's been doing some pods that are talking about the Communist Manifesto, and he did one on Jacobin that was like 2 hours long, and then did a follow-up one maybe a couple months ago, just like with Haymarket's new podcast where he was still talking about the manifesto. And anyways, I was listening to this podcast on the drive back to where I live yesterday, and it got me thinking about on the topic of sort of like insufficiencies and whatnot. Like I lost my train of thought as I was giving the context of the actual podcast. But I like, there's a lot of conversation about, I guess it gets at the sort of like incremental change thing, or sort of just like, good stuff is insufficient. And so we have all these, we get lost in the not lost, I should say, but we have all these conversations about sort of like things we would like to see better. And then we end up podcasting, and I'm having my first complete, I lost my train of thought.
Let me try and help you through it. Okay, so we end up in a situation where it's like, incrementalism is insufficient. I can just give my thoughts on incrementalism. Is that it's like, it's helpful, but it doesn't, it's not going to get you all the way there. And as a means of class struggle, is any of this resonating?
Yeah. It was about this, but it was something more too. Keep giving your thoughts on incrementalism.
So incrementalism isn't sufficient, but especially in a country like the United States in current year, when there is sort of like a real lack of any kind of class consciousness, then incrementalism to help the masses understand their own position can be helpful, which is not to say that it's enough. But on the other hand, there's also like this kind of this current, especially in the terminally online left, of like people who are like any kind of incremental change is bad. And actually what we need to do is make the conditions worse, and then people will get really mad, and then they'll overthrow the system.
Mm-hmm. I was
Sorry,
on that topic, different podcast, but on my drive up to visit my family, I was listening to the Citarella and Catherine Liu interview.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And they made the point in that podcast that, and I don't know what the analysis they referenced was, but one of them made the point that, generally speaking, better working conditions promote more revolutionary behavior, rather than when things get super bad, it actually tends to like people just get too tired and depressed and are less likely to sort of act in sort of class solidarity or really continue to fight, and that there is some level of like seeing real wins, like genuine wins, that actually promotes the like challenges the sort of capitalist realism of like, oh shit, like actually things can just get better if we
things
mobilize.
Can get better.
And then people are like, oh well, I want more good stuff, or that group got good stuff, I want good stuff for me. But back to the incrementalism thing, it was, you know what my thinking was about was it was almost like it almost is the opposite. I feel like on the left there's a lot of debates about sort of like the intellectual truth of how things should, and it's related to the incrementalist stuff, right? Where we're like, take like the police and the conversation around policing and like defund the police, sort of the institution of people enforcing rules. I feel like there's this like, it's an interesting dynamic where there's conversation about like, is trying to reform the police, like, is that a worthwhile endeavor? Or are they just like, should we just abolish them? So there's like an incrementalism part of that. But at the same time, we're also having a conversation about like how we envision the police as an institution in a socialist society, right? Like the sort of ideal intellectual, the ideal of like what do we want as an institution of people enforcing the rules? Do you know what I mean? Like there's almost like two conversations going on at one, where we're having an incremental, but then also like an ideal. And then we get, I feel like it even more so gets in the way of, it creates even more confusion. Does that make any sense?
This is like, I mean, this is the ultimate sort of like peak liberalism trick, rather the dangerous sort of backsliding from these utopian ideals come like crashing back down to earth, and then you just get some like incrementalism that ultimately doesn't really make anyone happy. And so by not engaging with material reality in kind of like in a more meaningful way, I'm sorry, but like defund the police in terms of total defunding was never going to happen. And I think the people who were at the head are not, well, I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen in the short term. I mean, it could, you don't need Marxism for that, to quote Chris Catrone. But a total defunding of the police, I don't, like, what does that even mean? What does that even look like? Are we talking about totally, like, they have no funds? Are we talking about they have less funds? And so it's kind of this, like, thing that's posited, that I think is probably came out of, like, a more thought-through position, but then it gets co-opted, and you get a bunch of white liberals like us who latch onto this and are like, yes, defund all police bad, and they need to go right now. And then it becomes unachievable, and then we end up with basically just like body cams. And so it's this just like posit something that's like kind of unrealizable and unworkable in the current situation, and then you backslide to something that ultimately ends up with people not really being all that happy. So, and like we can quibble about this as like being like a rhetorical mistake. Like obviously the police are a fucked up, messy institution that largely exists to enforce property rights, which is not to say I hate all individual police officers or anything. And I do think the institution of policing needs reform. But at the same time, it was like this, it got so mumbled so quickly. And instead of saying something more coherent, and there were people saying this, and they were not thrust to the front of the movement, like we need more funding for like community resources to offload some of the duties of police. It just became like defund the police. And that was the slogan, and that was everywhere on social media, and that dominated the conversation. And so that's the sorry, I don't fucking rambling about that, but
no, I mean it's interesting to me, and the reason I brought it up in reaction to the podcast I'd listened to with China on which always throws me off that that's his first name.
China.
I just will. Oh, I need to note that every time I bring him up. I love listening to podcasts with the guy. I really like I think he's an interesting person. For those who haven't listened, I don't know. I just like him on podcasts. But it's still just weird to me. There's a girl I work with whose name is India. Every time your name is a country, it just. I'm sorry. I don't know. Anyways, besides that point, but he makes this point where he's like, we on the left, we should be able to make distinctions between intellectual, like seeking intellectual truth versus strategic truth. And the reality, of course, is that we're never going to defund the police, at least not in the modern, like past 10-year era of politics. Like, obviously that's not going to happen, but it doesn't necessarily throw out the conversation about whether or not people believe that that is sort of in the intellectual sphere. Whether or not police should even exist as an institution. Like, if people want to have that conversation, it should happen, and we need to be able to separate it from strategic truth, if you will. And then the question where it gets inevitably messy is if a group of people believes that, like, yeah, like police as an institution shouldn't exist, then how do you message that? Because you don't want to shy away from what you actually believe. And how do you message it, or how do you get closer to it? And I understand all of that is tricky, and I think I agree with your analysis that throwing like hashtag defund the police up on Twitter and getting that trending and then getting people reacting to it, and then we end up with just like body cams, like, is like this sort of inevitable cycle of this whole thing. But I'm curious about trying to make distinctions between there's conversations that are happening right now that are like, what do we do? There's multiple layers of this. One is first and foremost, there is the conversation about like, are any sort of reform, is that actually helpful in the long term? I think you and I, or maybe even it's just is it helpful. I think you and I are both, correct me if I'm saying something that you don't believe in, but I think you and I are both of the opinion that like, is it gonna fundamentally change anything? Is it gonna like, is reform gonna be the thing that leads to revolution? Like, probably not, but is it still good to like make people's lives materially better? Like, also yes.
Yeah, of course. Like, reform, reform is helpful but insufficient.
Yeah. So we're both on the same page there. There are people who disagree with that. But assuming that we're on the same page there, then you move into the conversation about like, okay, what reforms are actually helpful? And in the the conversation about police and the institution of policing, then there's all sorts of conversations to be had. And defund the police, to me, is there's a genre of Twitter user who just latches onto it and uses it as like a virtue signaling of like, look how morally superior I am. But throwing that person out the window, there's also a group of people who really engage with this on a deep intellectual level, who genuinely are of the belief that like, yeah, like police as like, we shouldn't have the institution of police is immoral. And I don't know, but so I wanted to distinguish between the two of those, because I think that there's an interesting conversation happening about like, what is the sort of quote unquote ideal institutional way of enforcing rules that is separate from conversations about strategy on the ground. And one of them, like I imagine, and so this is where I'm trying to make this point between, I think that there's this morph on the left, like conversation about reform now under a capitalist state versus the ideal what the ideal solution is. And that kind of what ends up happening is like this disagreement over whether or not we should be fighting for this incremental, actually maybe achievable thing, versus whether or not we should just like be honest about what our ultimate goal is. This fighting is like, we're not even, I think there's like some sort of like category error thing going on here where we're fighting about two different things. Like, one of them is, do you see what I'm saying at all here?
I do, and I feel like they're kind of the same thing. Because, I mean, this is the argument against, like, utopian socialism and utopianism broadly, is that you end up positing something that the idea of which is constrained by, like, if your ideas are shaped by the reality you live in, and you're positing some like ideal situation that implies that like somehow you're able to like formulate this adequately in your head, even though your ideas are at the same time like constrained by what's going on like in the outside world. And so you end up in a situation where it's like, well, you've posited something that like, I guess is maybe the best you can do under your current circumstances. So the limitations are already in place. And then ultimately the reformism, or rather the incrementalism, becomes a process of recognizing the distinctions that were already in existence when you posited the ideal. And so rather than doing that, what's more productive is to kind of like generate a path forward through continuous negation instead of looking to like, okay, here's off here, like how do we get there? Which again, this whole path is already conditioned, or up here is conditioned by, the idea is conditioned by the world, and then you go and you think like, how do we get there? And then that path is even more conditioned, or rather it realizes the conditions through which this is conceived, versus by identifying contradictions and negations or issues and seeking to sublate them, you kind of like, that's how you overcome that whole thing. And this is why cultural critique and critique of economic systems is important, is because that becomes the drive forward rather than positing something.
I guess I struggle with this one because, or go ahead. Yep.
This is the point of like, this is what the scientific socialist people would say, is that like, this is the point of Marxism, I think. And this is what sets it apart from previous socialist movements, of through using a dialectical method. It's how you develop like a look at the world and how you ultimately chart a path forward that's driven by this dialectical movement instead of by the positing and then seeking to move forward. And like this actually is, I think, the essence of Marxism, but Marxian thought, broadly speaking.
Okay, maybe I just need more help in understanding this one, so I want to keep going, because I have two things. One is that I'm not sure I buy that through the act, that I think that the act of negating something is also positing something.
Yes. Well, yes. Well, but it's a different kind of positing than just saying like, what if? Well, it's not a positing so much as the act of negation generates sublation, rather the negation of the negation becomes the sublation, right? So,
but I imagine a community of, like, imagine there's a little island somewhere, and there's 10 blue people and 10 green people, and the 10 blue people own the 10 green people as slaves. I think that the 10 green people can posit a future in which they're not slaves, that is more than just the freedoms that the 10 blue people have. They can imagine a world outside, they can imagine a world outside of just, we achieve the freedoms that the blue people have. I think that you can imagine something further.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but ultimately it's conditioned. I said conditioned by, or the positing is conditioned by. I think people have this impulse, and I don't think it's bad. Well, I don't think it's entirely bad, and I think it can be helpful in terms of like motivating people to seek a path forward. But in terms of like, how do we? But then the question becomes for the. What color are the slave people on the island again?
I forgot which one were which.
Okay, all right.
I think the blue people were the
Smurfs. The Smurfs are the slaves of the evil red people.
Sure, that's easier to remember.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the blue people. But then the process of realizing that freedom. Then the process of how do we go about realizing that freedom, that has to be sort of like done through looking at contradictions and then like what is possible given the material circumstances of this island. But even then, like now we're doing the thing where it's like we descend into hypotheticals about, different primary colored people, and this is ultimately like this is not a good way to think, because like we can come up with things like, well, would they even develop the social structures necessary like to understand slavery in the same way that we do now? Like maybe they would have a different just understanding of the world, and so this is why like positive hypotheticals can get dangerous.
I'm not throwing this hypothetical out there as a thought exercise in how to liberate the 10 blue Smurfs. That's not the point of the thought exercise. The thought exercise is that, can the 10 blue Smurfs imagine a freedom and a liberation for all 20 people on the island that's greater than just the freedom experienced by the slave owners, the evil red people? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think I would like to say.
So
I would like to say probably,
not entirely. I think I'm not entirely. I'm not entirely sold, and I understand that I don't think there's a lot of thought that's been done on this, and so I'm very open to someone. I just don't understand yet how. Here's what I'll say. I understand. I understand how the material conditions of the world you live in and the reality around you are constricting in terms of imagining a material future that somehow exists is separately than like you to use this comes up in philosophy classes, right? It was like, can you imagine a creature that's made up of parts that you don't already know what the parts are? And the answer is no. Like you actually can't. You get into this like, can you imagine something fundamentally new? And the answer is no. All you can do is combine things that you already know, right? So that's the.
I think if you do enough drugs, you actually can create something new. But
sure,
anyway.
maybe. I don't want to get lost in that
yeah.
conversation, but the people get into this point, right? Well, they're like, well, can you imagine something new? And they're like, yeah, I can imagine like an alien. And you're like, okay, well, what does your alien look like? Okay, well, it's just like a human that's
Little
got
green
green
guy,
skin
yeah.
and he's got like, he's got like a tail or something. So it's all just things that we know, but you can't actually imagine something fully new. And then you have to define what new means. Anyways, I don't want to get lost in discussions about what it means to create something new. But that I think gets at the sort of like material conditions of imagining something new.
Yeah.
Like you can't, unless we're doing a boatload of drugs, we can't imagine something that's like materially new. Like we're bound by the material world around us. But I don't think that entirely encapsulates what it is to imagine something new or imagine something different or to negate something around you. Because there's an emotional feeling which can't be put into the material world, an emotional feeling of some neglect of something that's not being met that I think is separate from imagining a new material world.
But that's alienation. That's it, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's not.
Maybe.
I don't know. I feel like it might be. Well, I would say, I mean, the utopian positing, I would say it's probably, well, it's not sufficient, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it, like, I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree it's not sufficient, but I just don't think that means it's not useful to.
Maybe it can be useful. I'm willing to, in some sense. I don't know if I would use it to chart a strategic path forward, but in terms of motivating people on an emotional level, like, sure.
Yeah, and I think
you just have to recognize what you're doing.
And attachment to something better is like, I get turned off by the idea that all we should be doing is negating bad things.
Yeah, but but when you negate the negation, you sublate. So then it's not really. I mean, it's negation, but it's not negation in the typical Anglosphere understanding as such.
Okay. Well, I don't want to create a semantic thing about like, are we negating or are we creating something positive?
It's not a semantic thing because I mean, in Hegel's formulation of negation, the original thing is preserved in the negation, right? It's not just going like thing bad. It's more nuanced than that.
How is negating something preserving it? Say that once more.
Fuck. You're gonna have to try and explain determinate negation, which I'm not sure I understand, but. The negation of a thing, well, I guess you first have to have a thing in order to, like, you can't negate A without there first being A.
Yes.
And so the negation of A contains within it the concept of A, right? Almost necessarily. Yeah. And that's how the thing is preserved.
Because the negation of it
contains it. Yeah. i.e. negative A still has an A in there.
Got it.
Which is actually a really bad way to explain it because Hegel rejects formalism, but like for the sake.
Okay, well, for a simplified
conversation, like kind of,
us plebs or whatever, it makes a little more sense. Okay, so the other point I wanted to get to was what do we do about? I mean, if we're negating the negation, whatever, and Revolution Day comes, not having a plan for what to do afterwards is a nothing burger to me. It's still then the revolution is meaningless.
Well, looks like you need to read some. I really think we need to read some Lenin together, and then maybe this will get better. But I mean, like, yeah, you're right. There can't be no plan for post-revolution, or even the idea that like the revolution is going to be a day or even a series of days is probably a mistake.
Yeah.
And now people are going to accuse me of being a Trotskyist because sue me, but I don't think the idea of permanent revolution is at all a terrible one. But the idea that we're continuously.
So no, I'm very open to people criticizing me because I'm new to all of this, and people have done a lot more reading than I have, and so I know I'm not for the most part throwing out like ideas that have never been thought of before. That's not my goal right now. There's a lot of reading I need to do and that I want to do, but I don't want to like not have the conversation because I haven't done the reading yet.
No, that's totally fair. Yeah.
So if you're bored by it or find it lame, like dude, that's fine. We can move. We can do something else. But I'm definitely
not bored. I feel like I'm like maybe underqualified because I'm like not an expert either.
Well, who cares? Like we're trying to work through it. And it gets to one of my things I was thinking about yesterday, and is like, to make an oversimplified statement. I feel like this movement, whatever we are, whatever the broad like umbrella in which people who are like Marxist sympathetic, I feel strongly right now, and I'm open to having my opinion changed as always, but I feel strongly right now that we should be the group of people with the widest belief system. And I think that is for people who are promoting for people who are, and maybe this is again positing something that is not the way forward. I don't know, maybe I'm doing this whole thing wrong. But if the goal is sort of like a more realized democracy and democratic institutions and whatnot, my conception of that is one with like widely varying views. And so I feel like we are narrowing in many ways, like as the internet and podcasts and all this and that. And I want there to be some conception of like not doing that. Do you know
I definitely, well, I feel like there's a conflation between like online, which has descended into like hyper diverse, hyper atomized schizopolitics of like everyone is like a neo-Yarvanite monarchist, like hyper-Duginist, whatever.
Yeah.
And then real politics where it's kind of like the reality is that like you're either, a Dem, or you're something left of a Dem that's more anti-establishment, or you're a centrist person who tacitly is a fan of Trump, or you're a right-wing freak, and that like, but like the point is that like in the real world, like, yeah, I think there's a real absence of like of genuine leftist politics. And I think you're right insofar as identifying that like we do need to coalition build, because like clearly existing strategies are definitely not working for the Dems. And I mean, clearly what leftist parties in the US have been doing have been insufficient. Otherwise, they would be more powerful definitionally if they were sufficient. So totally. Like if you look at the sort of right wing right now, it's like, are you just generically anti-establishment? Like, welcome to the Trump club. Are you, a fucking white nationalist? Like, welcome to the Trump club. Although they're maybe starting to, they still like him more than they like the alternative. So like, are you just, they're super welcoming to people who from all over the place, and it feels like both the Dems and then all these scattered leftist parties definitely do have like a purity fetish in terms of like you need to be on board with like X, Y, and Z and perfect in so many ways. So yeah, I think we need to get rid of that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like again, I'll talk to anyone on this podcast in real life, but I'm gonna advocate for the stuff I believe in, and then we can all fight it out in a friendly way. We can combat liberalism and work out our disagreements and ultimately come to some kind of better understanding of the world. The dialectic, if you will. The OG dialectic was Plato's dialectic, as we all talk about it.
Yeah, I
feel like that didn't answer anything. Sorry, did I just?
No, I think I agree with it. It just like I guess it is the purity thing of, I'm wondering like what are the uncompromising to like be welcomed into the well, actually it had this bullet point here. Do you prefer, I'm just curious as a side conversation, do you prefer the label communist? What do you call yourself?
I would say I'm a post-capitalist. I feel like this is difficult because like communism is kind of like probably, yeah, if you really press me on it, like I would say I'm a Marxian post-capitalist. Because I feel like communists carry so much historical baggage that of things that either I straight up don't agree with or I believe are insufficient to meet the modern moment. But I think there's definitely a lot of valuable thought to be found in communist stuff. There's also a lot of valuable thought to be found in capitalist stuff. So, don't put me in a box. But yeah.
Anyway, well, I'm just curious because I'm not, if someone pressed me and said, or even just didn't even press me, they just asked me to describe to them the differences between communism and socialism, I couldn't do it. And so I'm not there yet. I know some people obviously feel strongly about that, and I imagine the ultimate DSA stand versus the ultimate American Communist Party stand would have a big old fight.
Well, I can tell you who would win that fight, physically anyway. And it's not the DSA.
Got no. But Yeah, the purity thing, I feel like there's something that's missing here, which is like there's so much talk about radical democracy in some form of like
What is it?
realizing real democracy to you.
Real, for real. It's never been tried
Realizing
before.
real-
Yeah. Real communism has never been tried. Real democracy has never been tried.
Sure, yeah, but what that means is this sort of like there is this contradiction there where real democracy implies, I don't want to use the real democracy, it sounds like I'm saying something dumb, but a more realized democracy implies like a huge diversity in thought.
Is it?
And so like in a democratic system, saying that you can only participate in the that you're only truly in favor of like human liberation or realized democracy or whatnot, if you agree with views which would be voted upon and discussed under said democratic system, seems very like gatekeepery to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think here's the problem ultimately, is that like somewhere along the line, I think we have to reconceptualize parties a little bit, not entirely. But maybe we have to return to monkey, or we need to negate the current understanding of the party, which is that like everyone in the party has to be like ideologically on the same page and like buddy, and that's not the case in my view. And someone more educated in political science could probably detail this better. A party is a thing that works toward like specific material goals, right? And so I think when you come at it with that understanding, you don't have to collapse where people are at ideologically, because the point is to like actually achieve real things in the real world and not fucking circle jerk ourselves about how great liberalism is or how we as the Spartacists are the last true communists and we're going to proletarianize you by having you scrub a toilet with a toothbrush. They really do that, by the way. That's a small communist party. But the point is that like we have to look at things in the real world and say like we need to improve this, and then like that's your party program and that's like what you go after. You don't have to agree with everyone about all these things all the time. And so that also opens the door for collaboration, hopefully not in a way that gets co-opted, but collaboration between political parties or political blocs. Because again, like if we're chasing the same things or similar things, then like there you go, as opposed to like we all need to be friends. I think you should read it's pretty short, you should read you should unironically read Combat Liberalism by Mao. Or he kind of talks about like how there's this liberal preoccupation, because it's ultimately, I think, a liberal tendency of like, we all need to hash out ideas so we can get to a point where there will be no disagreements. And that's not really I don't buy at all. Yeah, that's not a thing that happens in the real world.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying makes sense. I'm trying to tie this all together. So I'm reading one of the books from the sort of like intro reading list on Haymarket, and it's called Socialism Seriously by Danny something.
Yeah, and skip all that shit, by the way. Don't even bother. But you already have the book.
And why do you say skip all that shit?
I say skip all that shit because those people are going to come at things through an ideological lens that just go read the primary sources. And if you need text to help you understand the primary sources, as I do because I'm stupid, then that's fine. But I want to listen to other people's ideas. I don't know. I think it helps me understand I want to do both. Okay. Sorry, I'm being a little bit polemic. I'm trying to.
Yeah, I understand the frustration with someone who's read one Introduction to Socialism book and then stops there, but that's not my goal.
Okay.
Like,
all right, well, then that's fine, I guess.
There is so much to think about in this landscape that I'm viewing the sort of quote unquote intro reading as just like here are the general topics which are discussed, and then as I go do more primary text reading, whatever. It's a lifelong journey of learning, and I am being just introduced to concepts, even if they're still framed in a capitalist framework or on a liberal framework or ideology, blah, blah, blah. I don't like whatever.
Yeah, sorry, I was being a little bit of a dick.
Yeah, no, I know. But I find discourse about all this to be frustrating. But anyways,
it is very frustrating.
Maybe we hate this book. Maybe we think it's stupid and it's not worthwhile. That's
maybe
fine.
It's really good. I actually like.
No, I'm reading it, and there are times I'm like, I'm not like obsessed with the book by any stretch. But he has this chapter, which I think you would probably trigger the shit out of you in the beginning of the book, which is like imagining a bad day under socialism. So he's positing some sort of like socialist future. So immediate But anyways, ignoring that, he describes this character who goes to some like community. They've got like a community whatever voting democratic system where the debate is whether or not to ban cars altogether. Like they've got public transportation that everyone takes to and from work. But people like to drive cars for fun, and they want to have like a public race course to like drive their cars. And so people are having this debate about whether or not like should we just ban all cars or not. And this is what people are voting on. And now maybe there are parties at play here, but I'm not even imagining a world at which there's parties. I'm just imagining a group of people who disagree about whether or not cars should exist, right? And so it's kind of a silly example, but I feel like so this is imagining, of course, that the revolution has happened and that socialism is here, and maybe we can't do all that. So maybe I'm too stuck on this thing which can't be done.
It's pure idealism. I genuinely think you're going to read this stuff and you're going to end up more frustrated and confused than when you started. And this is why I advocate reading the primary text stuff, because like, what are we even talking about? I get the point is that he's trying to be a little bit polemic and like because ultimately the point is to get the reader interested in socialism by positing something. And I think that's fine. As a rhetorical tool, I think that's fine. But in terms of taking this seriously, like what are we talking about here? This isn't, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not going to hide maybe it's a really good book. I don't know. Send me the title.
I'm sure but there's a bajillion problems with it.
I'm frustrated.
But
angry.
I mean, the intro to anything is not gonna, the introduction to anything is not gonna capture what the people who are having serious conversations about it are
No, that's true. That's true.
And it's inevitably people are gonna come with questions. People who are taking their first macroeconomics course in college and have never taken an econ course before are going to ask questions about things they see as contradictory or hypotheticals that maybe professors have been doing this for 20 years are going to find frustrating, because they're like, their honest reaction is like, you're missing the point. That doesn't stop worrying about that. Like that you're imagining something that's, you're not understanding the whole whatever. And so I get that, but I'm not asking the question like whether or not. My point is more just that I feel like people there's an expectation to agree on whether or not we should or shouldn't ban cars prior to even getting to a point where that conversation is happening or possible. And there's like prerequisite of agreeing upon something which could only take place in a world that doesn't exist. And so we're like the conversation about abolishing the police. It can't. There's going to be, like, capitalism requires, correct me if I'm wrong, but someone to enforce the ownership of private property and and like you need a group of people defending the people who own things stuff. So whether or not you agree with that, with abolish the police, or whether or not you agree with what the institution of people enforcing the law is, shouldn't be something that gets in the way of whether or not you're welcomed into the socialist movement. That's my frustration.
I agree completely. Okay, well, we ultimately ended up at the same place, but I completely agree.
Because we're talking about something which can't. Yeah, maybe we're at the same point, because we're talking about something which can't exist yet.
Yes,
and not materially viable.
Right. Yes.
And so that debate, whether or not we agree on something which is materially viable, can't be.
What the fuck are we talking about? Yeah, we can talk about it in the abstract, but we can't let this be a blocker to think. Yes, correct. 100%.
That's my end point.
Okay, all right. I'm glad we got there. Okay, yeah, good.
But I feel like it's a big blocker. And I don't know. You got me reading Capital for the first time, like a little over a year ago, maybe. And I've taken some breaks, and I'm not I haven't done much and I haven't done any organizing. So I'm new to this whole thing. I am definitionally quite new. And I'm very open to the fact that I'm going to say things that as I get more interested in this, engage more, maybe go do some organizing, I'm going to listen to this podcast 5 years from now and be like, Chris, you dumb fuck. You just didn't get it. You just didn't fucking get it.
But if you did get it, wouldn't that actually be the worst outcome? Wouldn't that be more horrifying? I hope I listen to this in 5 years and I'm like, Jesus, I was a moron. Because if I didn't, that means I haven't grown. Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm expecting that. And I'm not, I'm frustrated with the sense here that I should have to get it right now in order to be welcomed into the movement and to not be laughed at. Because I feel like this keeps people from getting engaged. And I'm frustrated with the asking stupid questions being a thing which people use as they'll like dunk on you instead of trying to engage with you. And maybe I'm misreading something that isn't actually happening, but I'm also frustrated with just how much time there is spent talking about things with which my little knowledge are like materially not viable. And I want those conversations to happen because I think it's fun and interesting, and I still think there's something important to it. But the level of you're not a real socialist because you disagree with my thing that can only be actually implemented and not the reality that we live in, and it drives me bonkers.
It's ridiculous, and
I feel like it dominates all of the conversation.
Yes, dude. This is why I'm so, because this is what Marxism, this is what Marxian analysis is all about. Is that like this shit is a waste of time. Marx understood this.
I think I'm getting there.
This is the point, because it feels like you go out and it's like all my progressive friends on Instagram, I'm calling you guys out, where it's like it feels like we're making the same mistakes that the left made like in like the 1850s, or like the Russian left made like prior to like the first Russian Revolution. Like, it's like we keep making the same fucking mistakes over and over again. And this is the frustrating part, is because like people haven't done the primary source readings. And I feel like if they did, then we could actually get somewhere. That's why I think it's important, not because like I'm schizo-pilled and I think that Marx is based in the best and stuff, but like there are real historical lessons to be learned. And by not learning them, we're just doomed to just fucking circle the drain forever. Things that don't matter or unrealizable, and pretty soon we're back at like Fourier's lemonade seas and the Earth having 3 moons or something, and it's like, what the fuck are we talking about? All right, sorry. That's why I'm angry.
Okay, I think we're on the same.
Good.
We're on the same page there.
Based. Yeah.
So, yeah, I like those conversations. I do think they're fun, and but I made this bullet point in our prep notes, which came at a very tired hour last evening, and so they're kind of bad. But I was like, so I understand that there's like a right-wing / like capitalist like strategic strategy here to sort of like strawman the left as just being a bunch of like people who scream about like woke shit and just whatever. Like there's a strategy there. Like they don't want, even when we do talk about something like landlords or something, there's a strategy to not want to talk about it. So I understand that, but I also want, and I'm sure people who've been organizing and doing political education for a long time are going to get mad at me as a newbie for saying this, but like I want that to not be our image. Like I want the image of a socialist to be someone who's just annoyingly like won't shut the fuck up about rent, just like won't shut up about it.
Yes, yeah,
and someone who just like is really annoying at work because like the managers just, this kid just won't stop, like won't shut the fuck up about you, like whatever it is. And it doesn't have to just be economic issues or whatever, but like material things on the ground,
like real
which can
things
change, and which like I want that to be the image of us. And maybe this is the whole American Communist Party.
Kind of. Yeah, a little bit. And so, no, you kind of see where they're coming from here. But no, but also, I will say this, is that like, if you go and there are like CIA documents from like the 1970s about how to break up leftist groups, is that you hyper focus on small issues, individual identities, and then make the whole thing descend into conversations around that, and then nothing gets done. So I'm not saying it's all a psyop, but I'm also not saying
not saying it.
But I think it's more insidious, is that they're because ultimately like the fixation on those things, like that is liberalism. Those people are left liberals. Is what that is, and so that's what needs to be excised. Which, by the way, is not to say that like fucking black people don't have it worse. Like we can talk about these things, but talking about these things without class is meaningless and it's vacuous. And this is how you end up with like, okay, we're gonna give business credits to black people who like start businesses. Okay, like I'm not anti that, but ultimately like it's very transparent as to what's going on there. It's like they want you to be a capitalist, or like the idea of like uplifting black people is like, oh, you get to be capitalist too. And it's like, okay, it's just, but also that's one of the good things about capitalism is we get to the idea where everyone should be on the same playing field. And
this is one of the problems with what we refer to as right-wing populism, which is it's just replacing one hierarchical group with another. And so you're not like like
Well, it's
in a
not
world in
well,
which
yeah.
okay, yeah, I'm open to being corrected, but like just sort of like it, if there's a world in which we flip-flop and, you know, the percentages that apply to white Americans in terms of class distribution just flip-flopped with another race, like that doesn't actually make anything better.
Yeah. No.
And that shouldn't be the goal either.
No, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason I was like, I wanted to push back on hierarchies is that, like, I guess you can say that, like, that class literally is a hierarchy, but it's determined by the relationship of someone to the means of production as opposed to ideology, which is like,
I think that makes sense. Well, I was having a conversation over the Thanksgiving break. I don't remember with who, someone in my family, but I was talking about how we were talking about there's been a lot of like individual trauma in my family, just like loss of someone at an age that wasn't expected, or you know, someone left and it wasn't like just personal loss in some way. And I was talking about how it affected this person in my family and like sort of like what I perceive as its effects. And then someone came into the conversation and said, yeah, like I totally agree, but also, you know, there's the generational thing of having grown up in the Depression, right, that affects them. And my reaction was wanting to scream like, and I think this is exactly related. I'm like, why do we only refer to trauma if it's like individual, like your dad died, and not something that happens on a generational level? Like that was calling like
traumatic,
that was a mass traumatic experience. And so this is one of the things that like the working class sort of like experience is a mass trauma. And referring to it as that helps us understand what's going on, like understand like human behavior and understand like what's like kind of bad about it, just a little bad. But it's interesting that we don't, generally speaking, I mean, we will probably with like Holocaust survivors when something gets that bad, or we can collectively sort of as liberals look back at it and say that was a bad event, like fascism bad. But it clearly, this distinction somehow sinks its way into everything. We like to individualize things.
Well,
and talk about how to like deal with interpersonal problems, but not deal with the existence of trauma on a mass scale.
Yeah, and it makes, when you think about like what is trauma, and you would actually probably know better than, but like trauma is an event which you sort of can't fit into your understanding of the world such that it shatters your understanding of the world and renders it insufficient, and thus you're kind of unable to emotionally process it, right? Like, is that correct? Yeah,
I think that,
like broadly, am I?
I mean, I think that's I don't know if that's necessarily how I define it, but I think that's definitely a pretty universal experience of trauma.
Well, because
I don't know how I define it.
The example I would give here is that, you know, if I were to be walking on the street and then, well, it's like, I guess what I'm getting at here is it's like, what is your normal? And then something that completely shatters that. And then your ability to kind of like explain that, to rationalize it into your normal.
Yeah. The only problem though is like kids who are like sexually assaulted from like infant age is traumatic, and to them they know nothing else. Like that is just normal.
I guess that would fall outside of I don't.
But they still, I mean, I think that they would experience kids who live in society, live in broader society where hopefully most kids are not experiencing that. Like they don't really have the language to explain what's happening to them in a rational
and that's
way.
probably like that seems like that would be immensely traumatic, of literally not having the language to explain something. I think that's called like hermeneutical violence. I'm going to go check that when this is done. But the point I'm getting at here is that ultimately, like, capitalist ideology and liberalism broadly is totally unable to explain some things, some shocks, and that leaves us with kind of like a mass trauma. Like, I think like the Great Depression is kind of like a great example of this, is like, you know, kind of the myth that capitalist markets are supposed to ultimately create the most good for everyone, and that happens, and it's like, well, fuck, like clearly like that understanding of the world is just wrong, and like you're basically like the real in a Lacanian sense, is encountering ideology and brushing up against it in a way that's irreconcilable. And that's how you get, or kind of like, I think like what happened to, to personalize this, our generation with COVID is that I think probably if you asked me before 2020, like, would that be possible? I'm like, no, I think there's like probably strong enough like institutions and medical practices in place to prevent like a global pandemic from happening. And there fucking weren't. And it was, I obviously couldn't have been worse. Like, almost anything could be worse. But it totally sort of rewrote my understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're on the same. I think we ended up.
Basically, we agree.
Similar.
We agree about everything.
Yeah.
We did the dialectic and
we did it, folks.
Yeah.
And I'll do some more reading, okay? But maybe I'm also like, well, just one other curiosity here. It seems to me not materially viable to like expect a mass number of working class people to start reading some primary text in a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
And this probably deserves its own full podcast. But how do we combat the sort of like gut reaction? I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for. It's like reflux or something. That's not the word. What's it called when you've got like you just react to it without thinking about it, like a subconscious reaction. Reflex.
Like a reflex site.
That's what I was thinking of. Reflex. I was saying reflux, and I was like, that's
acid
not
reflux.
right.
Yeah.
So how do we combat the reflex to? That still sounds wrong to me. Anyways, I'm going to move past this because it's not important. How do we combat this? Like exactly what we just laid out and had a little bit of a lengthy time arriving at, but this reaction to like debate things which aren't like materially viable and get lost in these hypotheticals and whatnot, and sort of like talk about things on a more personal individual level. When you say like you're frustrated with the fact that so many people who talk about this online like just haven't done the primary source readings, like is that the only way to get people out of that loop? And like if so, then what do we do?
Well, I think that specifically is an issue with dumbasses on social media that far transcends leftism or anything else. But like ultimately like I don't expect every single person to like read primary source texts, and we I guess do need to be better about picking up the slack in disseminating the real truth as we see it, and not Instagram infographics about why not being polyamorous is violent or something. But yeah, no, I think, well, so much of that becomes a question about the structure of the internet and knowledge dissemination. And I don't have any answers, but.
So let me give a specific example. In your view, is it a better use of time if I'm thinking of, which I'm not, but this is hypothetical. If I was to make a video essay, and I was to make one of two video essays. One was why, if you're not polyamorous, you're committing violence. That's option number one. And, spend 15 minutes arriving upon it. And, at minute 8, I dropped the like, therefore capitalism is bad. And then like monogamy is like a symptom of whatever. And like polyamory is, whatever. So that's option one. And option two is like, obviously we both agree that that's option one is kind of the silly dominant thing on the internet right now. So what is the good version of the video essay? Like, what is the political education that's worthwhile? And I know this won't get views and won't get watched, and that runs into a little problem. But is something that, if I made a 15-minute video essay that's like, hey, people who live in Wisconsin, here are the laws regarding like creating a union at work, and here's how to go about is that what we're after though?
No,
like just engaging with the material.
Like I think there are good video essays, and ultimately like you got to do what gets to some extent you got to do what you're passionate about and kind of link it back to things. And I don't think just like spitting just like raw factual information at people is like the most interesting. And I think as the left, we do need to dominate. As the real left, the post-capital, we need to dominate cultural spaces in a way that we haven't.
Sure. So what if it's like a Johnny Harris style, like engaging video with a bunch of maps, but we're doing it and like telling some interesting story about like the material world through like maps.
I think
that gets views, and then you end it with like some links to read more somewhere or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever the fuck.
I think that's awesome.
That's the kind of shit that's cool.
Yeah, I think most of my issues with video essays are holistically about the quality of writing and their theses, statements, or lack thereof. Not just like, oh, they need to drop links to things, but is that they need to be more genuinely critical and engage with things in a deeper way. Well, really, I'm not even going to talk about it because we need to wrap up. But
yeah, I need to bounce. But I mean, if you would have asked me 2 hours ago, I've held this belief for a long time now that just like video essays as a whole, like it's not that there aren't individual good video essays, but basically on an institutional level, if we can even refer to it as
it is an
institution of YouTube.
At this point, video essays are an institution.
I have been of the opinion to hashtag defund the video essay.
Defund the video essay. We need it's done.
I wanted them to all stop, and now maybe I've been convinced that there is some political education is still a worthwhile task.
Yeah, I don't think they're all bad, but I do think we need to defund them, if not completely.
Yeah.
Enough is enough.
Hashtag cancel Patreon.
Cancel
except
Patreon.
ours.
Except ours, which I haven't set up yet, but I probably will one day. All right.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
See.
Wait, Chris, don't.